All right, so we're recording now, and we were just talking about the progress, steady improvement in the puzzles. All that's very good, and we're just over the crest of the 50% mark for our 10 lessons that we were planning on doing. So the chess speed run is halfway through, and we're not going to look at endgames any more than we already have. In the last session, we looked at rook and pawn endgames, and that was more just to give you an idea of like how theoretical endgames can be and how systematically you can study them and how you can learn some landmark positions. And it's kind of like your opening prep, but just for the end of the game. For example, you remember how those pawn endgames came up over and over again, even though it's a rook and pawn endgame that we were studying? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that you'll want to study on your own at the end of our 10 sessions. You'll want to look up good examples like those, commit them to memory, understand them, that kind of thing. Now, today we're going to pivot towards the middle game, that ambiguous middle territory between what we studied in the beginning, which is just like putting your pieces on good squares, keeping your king safe, controlling the center of the board, and endgames, which is, we have very few pieces. How do we actually promote to a queen or checkmate them with very few pieces? That middle territory is very complex. So that's why we went in the order that we did. I think for a speed run of chess, it's good to, be able to survive the opening. So we've done that. You need to have a little bit of theoretical knowledge. We've done that too. And just connecting the two is our middle game thing. And there are way many diverse themes in the middle game. And we're going to focus on probably just one of them for now. One that I think gives the most bang for your buck, especially when you're first learning, and that's attacking chess. Attacking chess, I think it's a low-hanging fruit when it comes to chess improvement, because a lot of the more theoretical things about chess don't matter when you're attacking.
Okay.
For example, you've probably heard about pawn structures by now, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some theoretical ways to handle your pawn structure. Pawn structure doesn't matter if you're checkmating someone. So we're going to focus on those techniques. So the first thing I have is a bit of a brain teaser, not really a chess puzzle so much. But do you know what an odds game is in chess?
No, I don't.
Okay. So it was fashionable in the 1800s and earlier to sometimes play against a weaker opponent, but give them some kind of benefit to compensate for the difference in your skill.
Oh. Okay.
Very macho stuff, yeah. So, for example, Paul Morphy, whose games we already looked at a little bit, he would often play like rook odds against diplomats and dignitaries from Europe when they visited New Orleans, where he lived. And so he was entertaining people that way. They'd be not that good, but he'd give them an extra rook, and he'd beat them anyway, and they'd be like, oh, you're so good at chess. Odds games are kind of interesting, even though there's not much practical use behind them, because the way that you should handle yourself in a position where you are already down a rook or something is by attacking them. This is generally good, because if you try to take a slow positional approach, it's just going to fail. You understand why?
Because if you're the first one taking a piece, then you're probably going to come out ahead with the exchange.
Well, let's say you make even exchanges for the whole rest of the game, even though you started down a rook. What's going to happen?
Okay. I guess their positions aren't going to be as neat as yours, but it doesn't matter since you're attacking anyway.
Well, let's say you're not attacking, right? Like, just to see why attacking chess is what we have to do. So let's say you don't do attacking chess, and inevitably we're going to exchange some pieces, right?
Right.
Because the number of pieces on the board either stays the same or goes down, no matter what.
Yeah. So then it's kind of like if you have two teams playing sports and you just remove evenly matched people, like pair by pair, and then in the end you end up with like 2 versus 1.
Yeah, exactly. So if you make even exchanges and you started out down a rook, you're eventually going to reach an endgame similar to the one we already looked at with just checkmating with a rook against king. Mm-hmm. Probably it'll be even worse than that, though, because it's actually not that easy to exchange all of the pawns. Not a trivial task, because they can't attack each other from the front.
Right.
So that would be a problem. What if you are able to win back some material and you start down a rook, do you think you'll be able to save the game with like a few pawns for your rook, or maybe a bishop or a knight?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, that's true. So if you can outplay your opponent strategically extremely well, even though you don't have a rook, you can probably hope for like a draw, maybe. So you really need substantial gains in order to make up for being down a rook. And psychologically, it's difficult to defend. So your best chances of making that kind of big material return is with the attack, especially attacking their king.
Okay.
So attacking chess itself has some principles. Let's talk about those briefly before I hit you with this puzzle again. That I'm going to tell you what it is in a second. So there are lots of attacking principles, but the main things are, one, you should use all of your pieces. Like, if you can attack with a full army at once, it's way harder to defend than if you're attacking with just like 2 or 3 pieces. You also want to attack with... it doesn't really matter which pieces you're attacking with, in the sense that the value of the pieces doesn't matter. The reason is you want to control just the squares around the king. So if you have to sacrifice your queen to get it done, that doesn't matter. If you have to sacrifice your knight, that doesn't matter. If you end up checkmating with, lower value pieces like knights and bishops, or maybe even pawns, that's all fine. So you want to use all the pieces, but you shouldn't be too worried about the value of the pieces that you're attacking with. Okay?
Okay.
And the last thing is that you should make sure that your attack is relentless. You can't like attack a little bit and then develop a couple more pieces and then attack some more. It has to be all at once, and you need to finish the game right then and there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that comes from that idea is that you should not allow the king to escape the area where you are attacking. When you're attacking, you're going to sacrifice pieces. You need to do whatever it takes to control all the squares around the king, and that's it. We don't care about anything else. No pawn structure, we don't care about the endgame prospects, nothing. No material, just get the king. Now, that being said, let's look at this position right here. It's the starting position, and we're going to pretend that we have to play an odds game, just like what we described. Now, that means you're going to be down material as white. Let's say, usually the person who is to give odds is playing white. That's the tradition. And let's say you have to give 2 pawn odds. Well, actually, let's start with the easier case. Let's say you have to give rook odds. Which rook would you want to give up, and why?
I guess the A rook.
How come?
Because then you can castle faster on the other side.
Yeah, that's right. We want to attack really fast. So we should give up the A rook. In almost all of the rook odds games in that have been recorded through history, the strong player is giving up the A rook. Almost never the king's rook. Sometimes they'll let their opponent choose which one, and then they might choose the king's rook, but if they get the choice, they give up the queen's rook, almost always. Okay, now let's say you want to give up 2 pawns. This is my main question here. Which 2 would you give up?
Would they also be like the A and B pawns then? So
A and B, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
That way it's not like part of this king's safety fortress when he castles on the other side.
Okay, so then you're thinking about keeping your own king safe during your attack. That's good. You should try to keep your king safe. But the most important thing is like the speed with which you attack, right? You want to get all the pieces involved extremely rapidly so that you can deliver that fatal blow. So if you give up the A pawn, how's that helping improve your pieces faster?
The rook is free to just yeet around.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe you could quickly lift the rook to like the 3rd rank and bring it to look at wherever their king lives. Something like that. What about the B pawn?
It doesn't actually do anything, I guess, because then my knight's already free to move, so maybe it'd be better to... Or, well, it does free up some room for the bishop to go out, but only to the 3rd rank, so it doesn't really do terribly much.
Yeah, I mean, you could also put it on B2, which is good, because it would look at G7. That could be useful. So it's not like you can only put it on A3, but I do agree that it's only helping to improve one piece. Are there any pawns that are obstructing multiple pieces, where like if you could move them out of the way,
Okay,
it would help you the most? Yeah, the e pawn. And what would your second choice be? Because you have to give 2 pawns. It's 2 pawn odds.
Yeah. So, I see that the queen is blocked by C, D, and E, and I've already taken away E. I don't know if taking away C makes that much sense, because, I mean, then I'm only removing the one that's blocking the rook from moving, which doesn't really help that much.
Yeah, you're getting warmer. Like, the E pawn was good. We don't really care necessarily about A, B, or C right now, because they're helpful, but not that helpful. E pawn's great. Opens your bishop, opens your queen.
Yeah. Would it then just be D?
Yeah, that's right. So if you can give up the E and D pawns, this is really good. This is a little known idea, so you keep this in your back pocket for if you ever have to play an odds game, which would be an unusual situation to find yourself in, but you know, just remember, this is a really, really good choice.
Okay.
I learned this because I used to teach camps and I'd play odds games against my students and stuff, and so I had time to do some experimentation and figure out which ones are best. And the reason here is we have to go for an attack. We're going to be down material, and the kinds of moves that we want to do for a rapid attack involve attack on the weakest point. And what's the weakest point for black again in the opening?
F7?
Yeah, that's right. So we would play like bishop c4, maybe queen h5 or f3, we don't know. Some knight move, knight f3 or knight h3, who knows, something like that. And like you said earlier, castle really fast so you can keep your king safe, and there's one other benefit for castling for the attack. What's it going to be?
Your rook is connected to the other one if your other pieces are out of the way, and also it's more free to look at the other pieces.
Yeah, exactly. So I would bring my rook from f1 to e1 after castling, so that I can look at the king exactly where that king is right now. Okay, so this is a good thought experiment. It's actually kind of paradoxical, because one of the opening principles that you learn is that you should control the center, right? And we have to give up the center pawn so we can attack better. In this example, I mean, we're under duress, so it's gonna be a little bit weird. We have to give up some pawns, but this does manifest in real chess sometimes, where once the center files are getting cleared out, maybe by pawn exchanges or maybe by a sacrifice, and the position does take on a more attacking character if you are also ahead in development. So these are signs that you should start an attack, even when you're not under pressure to do so. Make sense? Okay. So let's talk about the castling positions. We're going to focus on positions where your opponent does not castle today, but to understand why we handle uncastled positions the way we do, let's talk about what the castle looks like. Let me add a chapter for Kingside castling. Give me 1 second. I guess, you know what I could do? I could just play out a fake opening here, just for sake of discussion. Alright, so let's say we're playing some normal chess here. And we've both castled.
Okay.
Alright, so this is going to be our case study for the Kingside castle. Now, what makes this position safe for the king? We've talked about how castling is good for safety, but in a very hand-wavy sort of way. So what do you think makes it safe?
So if this pawn gets attacked, it's covered by this.
There's something else that keeps it safe too.
Oh, so if anything goes over here, then the rook is also there.
No, hold on. Let's focus on h2 a little bit more. I just want to highlight something important. So it's protected by the knight, and what else?
And also, is it just the king himself?
Yes, that's a very important detail. So let's not forget about that. Okay, so that's good. H2 is protected twice. And what about the other components?
He's protected by the king.
Only the king.
And then F2 is protected by both the king and the rook.
Right. So these are the 3 main weak points. And we were talking actually before we started recording about back rank mate, so we also have to be wary of, you know, a rook coming in on the first rank or something. I've had to cover my eyes in horror as many students get checkmated on the back rank. It happens very often. Don't do it, please. for my sake and your sake. In that order. I don't want to see any more back rank mates. Alright, so anyway. I mean, if it's cool, it's alright. But not like something stupid. So anyway. These are our main weaknesses, and we need to cover the back rank as well. That's all obvious enough. So, if we make modifications to the structure, it can actually make it so that it's not as good anymore. So what do you think is the worst thing we could do for our pawn structure here, in terms of king safety?
I think if there's something over here, then doubling the pawns by capturing it.
Oh, okay. So maybe I'm gonna play some fake moves again. Let's say I do this, and they play h5. They're going on a quest, I guess. I'm just gonna play some more silly stuff, and they just keep coming over here, and I'm gonna play something over here, and then they do this. So you would take it like that. Bad structure, right?
Very bad.
Definitely one of the worst. Requires some cooperation from your opponent because they have to go put a piece there.
Yeah.
A way that this could happen that's more realistic could be something like, let's pretend that they play like d6 maybe. We play knight g5, h6. This is an example of chasing a piece out of your territory that we talked about already. And let's say you go here. This is a more realistic way. How can black make the pawn structure bad for white?
In one move?
Yeah, in one move. It's the same thing you were talking about a second ago, but different.
I guess the knight can go and fork these two pawns.
Well, if you play knight g4, it kind of justifies the knight being on h3, because the knight is then protecting f2. So how about in one move? Just ruin the pawn structure right away.
Oh. Yeah, okay, I see this.
Well, that's a sacrifice, isn't it?
Oh yeah, true, because then it just gets eaten by the rook.
Yeah. If I say we're going to change the pawn structure, I generally mean like without modifying any of the other characteristics of the position too much. So think about it. You said one of the worst things that could happen is to end up with doubled pawns on the h-file, right? So can black make white have doubled pawns on the h-file?
Oh yeah, okay. I see this capture now.
Yeah, that's it. So you could take this, and it's worse to be down a piece than to have a bad structure, so they should take back. And that's how we get it. So this is a realistic way to get that to happen. And we talked about this annoying pin situation. If it was white doing it to black, it might look like this, where black does something careless, and then the knight comes here, and they're going to get double pawns in the f-file, which is also terrible. I wouldn't say this is the worst possible situation. This is more like a very common, terrible situation. It happens very, very frequently, so that's why it's worth studying. But let's say white really just wants to have a bad day. Like, worst possible thing you could do on the king side. Without any need for cooperation.
Just with the pawns, or just
with the pawns.
overall?
Let's say with the pawns. I mean, we could obviously like start giving our queen and everything, but not like that.
Is g4 maybe one of the worst?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the worst thing you could do right now.
Okay.
Not only does it give up a pawn, it permanently weakens the light squares, and you're actually about to lose a piece almost by force. So this is really, really bad. If black could play one more move here, what do you think black would play?
I'm wondering if there's like a quick mate that's about to happen.
Okay, like...
And I'm just kind of looking at the queen. But I don't see like something that can happen in one move.
Yeah.
Clearly.
A sign that you don't have a checkmate in one move here is that you don't control all the squares around the king. You only control one of them. That one.
Okay.
So we would need to spend at least a few moves.
Right.
How about just winning material? Because if you win material, you'll probably be able to go arrange the attack better, because you'll have more pieces to bring to the attack.
Okay. What if I do bishop takes f3?
Probably they'll take back.
Okay.
I think you can do better than that.
Okay.
But you're on the right track because you've identified that the knight is a target.
Yeah.
Also, you remember what this is called when there's two pieces in a line?
Yeah, it's a skewer or something.
It's a skewer when the higher piece is in front.
So in this case it's like an X-ray or whatever the fuck.
No, getting closer.
Okay.
X-ray is when you're attacking through one of your own pieces.
Ah, okay.
This time you're attacking two of your opponent's pieces. The lower piece is in front, higher piece is behind. It's skewer when it's flipped.
Yeah.
And it's called pin when the lower piece is in front.
Ah,
You remember that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a pin, and there's a mnemonic for what you do when there's a pin. People say you should put pressure on the pin piece because it can't move, so you can just bring more pieces to attack it without really suffering any consequence. So how do you attack the knight more?
Knight d4?
Yeah, knight d4 is the move. It's going to win a lot of material. This is assuming it's black's turn, of course. I could play an insert. I just add a move. Knight d4 is it. Okay. Good. So g4 is bad. But let's say that g4 was like a safe move. Or maybe we could play a safer version. We could play a move like g3. Do you think this is good for our king safety or bad in this example?
I think it's okay.
It's okay. I would say just okay. But there is a definite downside to it. You could think of this as the drawback principle. I made a video about drawback principle if you want to look at it. The idea of the drawback principle is that every move has a downside. It has something good about it, but you have to give up something every single time you make a move. So when you play g3, you give up control of two squares. Which squares are those?
G2 and also G3.
Well, did the pawn ever control g2?
No, true. Okay.
No.
So G3 and I mean you still have control of F3 because
the pawn that we moved never controlled g3.
Or no, I meant F3. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. F3.
Yeah.
And what's the other one?
H3.
Yeah. So these are the two. So we give up control of these squares. This can lead to something called a color complex weakness. Or just color weakness. So we have a set of squares that are all linked to each other that are all vulnerable. They're vulnerable because we control them less, but also it's easy to attack them. It's not a weakness if they can't attack it. So let's see. How should black try to invade on the weakened light squares? What would you play?
I'd probably still go bishop g4.
Yeah. And this is just as deadly as it was when they took a pawn for free. Because we're still putting tons of pressure on the light squares. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a good move here for white. It would be a really different story if white's bishop was on g2. You could imagine if the bishop was on g2 or even e2, this would not be such a big deal.
Right.
I would still consider it a weakness, but it would be a defensible weakness. This doesn't mean that all openings where you play g3 are bad. You'll probably notice as you play more that many people start the game with g3 or g6 on move 1 or move 2, and those openings are almost all fine. But at the same time, there is a pretty well-defined way to attack that pawn structure. Usually people are going to try to open up files. They'll play something like h5, h4, and then take this and bring a rook over here and attack on that open file. Yeah, so that's a common thing that people do. Doesn't mean it's bad, but there is a well-defined attacking technique against it. Okay, so there's that. What about the move h3? How does this impact our king safety?
I feel like it's better.
Okay, why?
Since we have, even though we're giving up control of g3, the other pawn still covers it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also increasing our, I guess, like safety net up to g4.
Yeah, that's true. We're controlling the g4 square, and we've seen that's important because bishop g4 was a repeating move. Also knight g4. We've seen that those moves are really important. We need to try to avoid them. And the only drawback is that it weakens g3. That is definitely something that's exploitable, but it's not the end of the world. So h3, it's pretty much fine. But it is a little bit of a weakening, technically. The general principle here is that the farther the pawns advance, the weaker your king will become. So one of the... well, you could easily imagine how a combination of h3 and g4 is bad, because we've already seen how g4 is not great. So I'll spare you. But how about comparing h3 versus h4?
It's not as good as h3, but it's still better than g4.
Yeah, absolutely better than g4. How will black try to exploit this move? Just using that drawback principle.
I guess, again, go for bishop g4, and then also try to open up a file in the h.
In this particular example, it's almost always bishop g4. But the reasons are slightly different each time. Like here, you might not be getting in knight d4. I mean, you might. That's also like useful. But it's also just a generally good thing to put your bishop here because it has become something like an outpost square. The pawn on h4 can never go back to h3 to control g4. So it's permanently a stronghold for black. And this justifies more attacking stuff. Now, this is all just about the Kingside, and you can imagine how moving the f-pawn might also present some difficulties. Here you can't even do it because the bishop is already highlighting the weakness of of moving the f-pawn. It opens up the king on the dark squares. So let's take a look at a queenside example. Let's see. So let's say we play like, I'll just show a real example. This is the Sicilian Opening. And, you know, let's also just throw in g6, because I was just mentioning how g6 is not always a bad move. Just to give a good example of that. So let's say we play these moves. It's not necessarily like the best move order or something, just a sample. Maybe I'll throw this one in. Okay, so now white has castled queenside and black has castled kingside, so we can compare the two in this example. So, are there any downsides for white having castled queenside, or just the queenside castled position in general? Anything stand out to you?
I feel like the a pawn is a little bit far from. It's only protected once, so you could just put pressure there, and then it would be a bit harder for the king to get in and do something, because that would cost an extra move to get back there.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if we want to attack, and the a-pawn is a target, and it would take them more time to defend it, then this means that when they castle queenside, we might have more attacking chances against their king, just based on that very small detail. So yeah, I think this is the number one takeaway here. There's another takeaway that is not obvious because of how white developed their pieces. This is actually a good position for both sides, so I didn't really make any deliberate mistakes. To highlight what the weakness might be, let's pretend that I play a couple more moves. Alright, let's say I do this, and you know, we're just doing some silly stuff here. And alright, just to highlight a point here, let's pretend that white has reached this position. This doesn't make a lot of sense, but it allows me to illustrate my point. Okay, so because when you castle queenside, your king is not tucked behind a complete wall of pawns, there's another vulnerability that you can have. So here, black is a winning move. See if you can spot it.
Oh. Well, I see that my pawn structure is very heavily favoring white, so I'm guessing there's something that has to do with both the black queen and black bishop on g7.
Yeah, there's some kind of compensation here.
Yeah.
It has to do with the control in the dark squares. So your intuition's getting better. You're following that idea. That's good. So what moves highlight that strength on the dark squares?
I mean, I'm not interested in taking c3 because that's doubly protected.
Yeah.
But I could.
I wouldn't. Which way would they capture? What do you think? With the queen or with a different piece?
Probably with queen. Oh no, not the queen, because then it'll just get taken back. But with the pawn, so that there's no interest in pursuing the queen further.
Right. It's good to resist the temptation to always take with like a certain kind of piece. Usually when you have like just 2 or 3 options and you're capturing back, you should consider all of them. That's just good practice in my opinion. So yeah, if they take with a pawn, then they just lost a queen for a knight. But if they took with a queen, it would all be a fair trade. Okay, so we're getting closer. We don't want to take on c3, okay. So some other dark square strength is what we need to use.
Okay, so you can also go bishop h6 and pin the queen.
Right. Can they save their queen in any way, or is that it for the queen?
Let's see. She can move in plenty of directions, but all of them along the diagonal that's being attacked are bad. See? No, because the queen can't move to begin with because it's pinned.
Right, it can only move along the diagonal and get lost. There's nothing else to do. So good. Yeah, this is a good example of how when you castle long, you can sometimes run into attack on this diagonal, and you have to look out for that. That's just a problem with queenside castling. Now, the advantage of queenside castling is that it gets your rook active faster. By the way, when you castle queenside, it takes slightly longer. So if you're able to rapidly launch an attack against the queenside, this already is like helping you if they castle that way, because it means they're also a little bit behind in development. But there's a time and place for queenside castling. For instance, I've had a lot of wins in this position with white, just because when I see this structure where they have some maybe weakness on the dark squares, I like to evacuate my king from the king side so that I can begin pushing the pawns to open up their king. So when you see opposite sides castling, attacking chess is a lot more likely to happen, and a draw is a lot less likely in my experience, at least at lower rating levels. Here, typically people will go with like bishop d7, and I'll play h4 and h5 and start sacrificing all of my pieces. Anyway, so all this discussion was just to say, like, there are some definite issues with changing your pawn structure when you castle kingside or queenside. All the same arguments about moving the kingside pawns, they apply on the queenside. I'm not going to bother you about this. The general principle here is don't move your pawns near your king that much. If you have to, it's good.
Would it make sense to move your king to b1 or just keep it where it is?
Putting it on b1 is a good idea. The question you have to answer is very specific to the position. It's like, do I have time for even one king move? Because in the attack, time is so important. You have to bring all the pieces as fast as you can and crush them. So you might not have time for it. But if you do, that's a good defending move. Okay, so let's talk just generally. So we saw that there are a bunch of problems with castling. Does it mean that we shouldn't castle? Is the king safer in the middle of the board, or what? What do you think about that?
I guess the answer is it depends.
It does depend, but there is a general trend as well. Being in the center is even more unsafe than castling, almost always.
Yeah, since there's all the cheese that can happen at lower.
Oh yes, there's plenty of center attack cheese, for sure. In fact, let's get on some of that center attack cheese. I want to find an example that just came to my mind. I'm gonna load it in so that we don't have to play it out too much. Give me 1 second to search for it. I know the game by heart, but it's just slightly faster to copy paste. Unless my computer wants to have a fit. Okay, there we go. Got it. Clicky click. Paste it again. Alrighty. So I've just pasted the game in, and we're looking at it. So this is a classic game between Steinitz and some random guy with a funny name. His name is Rock. In my database and everywhere that I've looked, his name is only Rock. So for all we know, the world champion Wilhelm Steinitz was playing a rock in this game. I have no idea who this guy is. But it's a great example for what we're talking about today. So let's get to it. So Steinitz, a little bit of background. He was the guy who created the World Chess Championship and the first chess champion. Convenient, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. I think he did it in like as fair a way as anyone can start a championship event and also be the champion. First of all, he's from the Kingdom of Bohemia, which didn't exist anymore after World War I believe. And lived in Germany, but then eventually became an American. That was a real whirlwind for that guy. So when he was in Europe, he was like, I'm pretty good at chess. Why don't we start a World Chess Championship? And chess was widely regarded as a gambling game back then, which meant that everyone loved it because gambling was probably more popular in the 1800s than any time since then. And so he's like, well, if I'm going to try to have a world championship, how would I do it? And so he raised up a bunch of money and said, okay, guys, come get it. If you can beat me, you can get all the money and be the world champion. Great deal, right? So this guy, I can't remember exactly who it was. I think it was a guy named von Barteleben. I think he challenged him, and Steinitz won, and then he became the world champion. Ta-da, easy. So if you ever want to be a world champion of something, just like create a game and then hold up a bunch of money in the air and like ask anyone to challenge you to become champion of that. All right. Anyway, so let's see this game. I'm going to spare you the formality here because we've already talked about these moves a lot. But here, normally we would talk about developing moves that are pretty normal. Like, we would talk about, like, maybe d3 to activate this bishop on c1, or maybe castling, or maybe knight c3, but not something like knight g5. Just as a reminder, what do you think black would play against knight g5?
He'd probably want to... I'm tempted to say kick the knight with the pawn, but also probably move the queen so that it doesn't get semi-forward.
Well, do you think you should let them come in on f7 at all?
No.
That's what they're trying to do, so we probably shouldn't allow that. So if you try to move your queen in anticipation of knight f7, it means that you've already given up on the idea of saving it. So let's not do that. What other options do we have to avoid a disaster on f7?
Just capture the knight with the queen?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the best thing to do. Nothing about like allowing knight f7 and running away. Just take that knight. Alright, now I'm going to quiz you again. Let's say I play d4. What's your move?
So now my queen's being attacked.
Right. You're quick on the draw this time. That's good.
Yeah, I've noticed that like lower rated players are really bad at noticing discovered attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the magician trick. You do this with your hand, but you have the card in this hand.
Because they only see the thing that moved.
Yeah, and where it went.
So, I'd probably go queen takes g2.
Yeah, exactly. Good. So this is really a refresher. We've already looked at this a little bit, so I'm glad you got this really quickly. That's improvement. So
I've just been seeing it in my own games.
yeah, nice. So you can apply it and crush people even better. So in this game, we're going to see an example of white going for an attack on the king and preventing them from even castling. To do this, you need a position of a certain kind of character. We've already talked about this a bit. This is probably the caveat of attacking chess. You cannot play chess on a high level in a great way just by attacking. You need to be able to do everything, like play strategically and everything like that. But when you're starting out, you can usually create a position with the kind of character that you need. It needs to be one where you have a development advantage, right? Because one of the principles of the attack is that we need to bring all the pieces in, and it really helps when they can't bring all their pieces to defend. So here, let's look for a move by white that can accelerate their development by forcing black to move pieces again. So this is another example of tempo, but this time we're going to think about how we can sacrifice and use that to get our pieces out. So what's an example of a pawn move, maybe, that's also a sacrifice for development?
I mean, the only pawn sacrifice I see is d4, since it goes straight into getting attacked 3 times.
Yeah, d4 is a good move. It's not the move that they played in the game, but this is definitely worth considering. So let's entertain this a little bit. So let's say that they take with the pawn. I think in this move order, it's more precise for them to take with the knight, or anyway. So let's pretend they take with the pawn. How would you continue to in like this attacking style? We just want to develop fast, right? So
yeah.
What's next?
Bishop c5, or no, bishop from c to g5.
Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's say we go there. And let's pretend I play something pedestrian, like knight f6, you know, like I already want to play it. I'm like, oh no, my queen's under attack. I'll play knight f6. You know, not thinking too hard. How do we keep attacking?
I know there's a check, but I know that's also just a random sacrifice.
It's just a check,
yeah. I don't know if like the king moving to f7 is
worth it.
For me.
Yeah. Here's a way you can think about it. You are giving up one of your attacking pieces just to move their king.
Yeah.
So in that light, it's not worth it. If you had more attack following after that, following the principle that when we attack, it should be relentless and end with the checkmate, then it would be good. But here, is that going to happen?
No, I don't have enough pieces.
Right. So we still need to either create threats to accelerate development or get more pieces out.
Would now be a good time to castle, or?
I think arguably now is a good time to castle. You might have a better option, but like I think this is perfectly good too. Let's just pretend a little bit more. Let's say I castle 2. How are we going to keep attacking?
e5.
Yeah, good. This is the move that I thought you should play in the last move, actually.
Oh.
So in this position, we're threatening to win a piece straight up. So this is already pretty good. This is another kind of attacking move. It's attacking the bishop, so they more or less have to take it, right? So let's say they do. The way that this improves the position for white, it now gives them the extra option to bring out their bishop to like b2 or a3 or something like that. Also, the bishop is vulnerable to further attack on b4. So how do we keep attacking it?
I guess it's either a3 or c3.
Which one do you think is more principled? Like helps your position more? A3 or which one?
I picked c3 since it gives an extra layer of pawns before the bishop can get to the king.
Yeah, c3 is better. You can think of this also as you're attacking and controlling the center. So we just, the way we transform the position here is we had this position before, and in the last 2 moves we've sacrificed a pawn, but we've kicked their bishop to a5, which we could argue maybe is good for us, and it's our turn again, so we can just get more and more of our development going. So how do we keep going? Try to just activate the pieces as much as possible.
Queen a4.
Does it create a threat?
No.
No, I would say not. I would wait to see where the queen belongs. Meanwhile, it's probably better to get more pieces involved.
Okay. So... oh... I think Winston almost just, like, pressed the play button.
Uh-oh.
He's, and I can show him. He's right here.
Winston, what are you doing? Winston, no.
Yeah, I was looking at the knight, though. Or...
which one?
The knight on b1. Possibly just taking it up to the wall.
Oh, on b1?
Or,
yeah.
Otherwise, taking the bishop and throwing it on a3.
Bishop a3 looks pretty good. Knight a3 not as good, because I don't think it has a great future there. I'd be more ambitious. I'd want to get my knight to like c3, maybe, if I could.
Okay.
Bishop a3 is pretty good, but I think that you could probably get more tempo. You could probably, you know, do... well, we were just talking about sacrificing pawns to get more development, right? So maybe we could just keep doing the same thing.
Sure. Then maybe I'll go with d4 now.
Right. So this is at least offering them. It's also worth mentioning this comes with a threat. We're threatening to take this e-pawn for free. And that you could say that this is like messing up white's pawn structure, but a pawn on e5 would be really annoying, controlling d6 and f6. So they kind of have to take it.
Yeah.
So now what should we do? Should we take back, or should we try to develop more?
I don't want to take back, just because it's threatening this weak pawn on my side at c3.
But you're playing attacking chess. Who cares, right? Material doesn't matter anymore.
Okay, yeah. Sure.
So this way of playing chess is kind of shiesty, because you're creating your own opportunities, right? You're trying to make the game have the character that you want it to have. And this comes at a price. It doesn't work that well at a high level, but it works extremely well below like 2,000 rating.
Sure. Okay. So then, like, balls to the wall.
Exactly.
Bishop g5.
Okay. Bishop g5 is a pretty good move, but the downside of bishop g5 is that they can play knight e7. So you improve your position, but they also improve their position. You're not. This is very hard to see, so you have to just take my word for it. Another way to think of it is that you would like to play move bishop a3. But bishop a3 shouldn't be the move that we play right away, because we have more generally useful moves to play at the moment. So you should wait until a critical moment to decide between these two. It's very hard to really understand it, but like there's another more general purpose move. And usually moves that have multiple uses should come before moves that are more like single purpose.
Okay.
So what's a flexible good move here?
I feel like I'm excessively defensive in the middle game, so I really want to castle.
Castling is good.
Yeah, but otherwise, I don't know.
The reason castling is good here is if we're going to be attacking, we need to keep our king safe, and this also helps to activate the rook, like bringing it to e1, like what we said earlier.
Sure.
So this is good, and it's flexible, because right now we don't know, do we want to play bishop g5? It depends. If they play knight f6, we do, because then it's going to be a permanent pin, if we can do that.
Oh.
And if we want to play bishop a3, this would actually be a little bit better if we can make them play a move like d5, because one of the downsides of bishop a3 is that they can block it. So let's see what they play before we show our cards, right? Castling is good, and it's not committal. Now, in this game, they played knight f6. Not very good. In the game, Steinitz chose bishop a3. And this is where we know for sure that his strategy worked. The reason is that black cannot castle. They would be in a lot of danger trying to castle here, because the bishop is just physically preventing it. And in the game, the guy played bishop b6. Pretty weird move. He should probably have played d6 anyway. But he played bishop b6. And this is a moment where, if this was your game, you should probably, like, smell blood. Like, you know that you're probably going to attack and checkmate them and destroy them very soon.
Sure.
The reason why is bishop to b6 is a further unnecessary waste of time. And since in the attack, having a lot more time is super useful, they're kind of just encouraging you to attack even more. At some point, when you've developed all of your pieces, or even before you've developed all of your pieces sometimes, you need to pick a weakness and just start hammering it. And that's where the attack is going to break through, on one of their weak squares. So how can we finish development more and attack their weaknesses?
I'm gonna say either knight to g5 or rook to e1.
Well, if I had to choose between the two, I think knight g5 would be more urgent. Like, you're definitely getting the attack going right there. Rook e1, a little bit slower. I think that if you play rook e1, they might play something like d6. But those are both very reasonable moves. But there's a third move which is more powerful than either one of those two. Something that creates an immediate, very dangerous threat that they can't meet.
Queen b3?
Yeah, very good. It's queen b3. I wanted to share a hint with you, but I wasn't sure if this would be too much of a giveaway to, like, make it easy. So when you do this, you're attacking f7 really well, but the problem is that they can now defend f7.
Oh, okay.
But when you play the move queen to b3, they can't do that. The knight is still covering the e5 square. Look at how white's pieces are all super active, except for that one stupid knight. White's pieces are, like, very, very good. The knight on b1 looks kind of silly, and so the rook on a1 looks silly too. But black's pieces look way worse. Like, they need to get out their bishop on c8. They need to get out their rook on a8. Their knights don't really have a lot of great places to go. They can't even castle. So even though white gave up a couple of pawns, it doesn't really feel like they're even down one pawn. They have full control of the position. So black did some calculation and came up with an idea to try to repel the attack. They played d5, which is a pretty logical move. The reason that this is logical is they want to get out that bishop that they weren't using, and this clears room for it with tempo, so why not? Steinitz captured with e takes d5, and now he played knight a5. This is a very difficult moment of the game for white, because they've spent so much time and also invested material to build up this attack, and now with the move knight a5, black is counterattacking pretty strongly. I'll just share with you that if they play a move like queen a5, white is actually worse because of the move bishop d7.
Okay.
The pieces aren't coordinating anymore for white because your queen is under attack. You kind of need to back off with the queen, but your bishop is also hanging. But if you block with the bishop, then you're trading pieces. You see how none of these things really fit with that attacking narrative? It's like, we want to bring all of our pieces to go get their king, but we have to start making repeated moves with our pieces. We have to trade pieces. That's not right. So when you see something like that, you can tell that you should probably find something a little bit stronger. And so that's what Steinitz did. First of all, he threw in one move that's kind of a no-brainer, a way to include more pieces in the attack. What do you think white should do to just develop a little bit more before figuring out what to do?
I accidentally looked ahead.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. I see it's rook e1.
Yeah. So you accidentally saw the move, but, like, it makes sense to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just attacking with the rook, no problem. If they have to move their king, this fully justifies your whole strategy. because you only gave up basically like one pawn because they had to sack a pawn just now, right? And if they have to move their king and you can keep attacking, like, that's great. So they're definitely not going to play this move. This move is horrible. You should be able to finish the game pretty quickly. But let's focus on what happens here. Apparently this guy Rock was pretty good, and he had prepared this move bishop e6, which is finishing development. It also hangs the bishop. But the reason that white maybe wouldn't want to take the bishop is that their own queen is hanging. You see how that's a balance here? Like, we want to take the bishop, but our queen is hanging too.
Right.
Now, if you want to go ahead and take the bishop, even though your queen's hanging, it's important to consider what happens if you do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because just because your queen's hanging doesn't mean you shouldn't take the bishop, right? We're playing attacking chess here. We are, going after their king. We don't care about material anymore. Anything that improves your attack is what we care about. We want to control just a few squares around their king. So let's say we do this. Let's calculate ahead a few moves. We're going to take the bishop. Let's pretend that they take the queen. What's going to happen next?
Then I would take the next pawn on f7.
Right.
Deal an attack, also attack the king at the same time.
Okay, good. And what are they going to do? How do they defend?
I guess then the king has to move.
Yeah, where? Can they take the pawn?
No, there's a bishop.
Right, good. So they only have one place to go. Which is?
Either d7 or f8. Oh wait, there is no f8 because there's another bishop.
Yeah, exactly. So all of white's pieces sort of make sense where they are now. It's preventing a lot of black's defenses. So they do have one move, though. So they can't go to f8 because of the bishop. They can't go to e7 because there's a bishop and a rook. They can't go to f7 because of the other bishop. They can't go to d8 because their queen is there. So only one spot left, which is
d7.
Right, so they have to go to d7. And we're visualizing this whole thing just because I think that's really good for improving your calculation. So what are they going to do next as white to keep attacking? This is the part where we need to be relentless because we gave up the queen.
Mm-hmm.
There's no going back at this point. Have to checkmate them.
Is that just bishop b5 then?
When you're in check, it's usually good to think about captures and blocks before running away. I think that if their king runs away, it's also actually fine. But let's say you check on b5. What are your options here as black? Can they capture the bishop?
Not immediately, but you can still block.
With what piece?
I guess there's options. So
yeah.
Either the knight or the queen.
There's actually not the option of the knight.
Oh.
Do you remember? Where's the knight right now?
Oh yeah, okay.
It's on b3.
Uh-huh.
So they actually can't block with the knight.
I was thinking of the one on f6. Would that...
All the way to c6? How can the knight block that far?
Oh no, yeah, okay, so... Yeah, I was thinking of the knight going to d7, but the king is already there.
Yeah, that's right. So they'd have to block differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're a few moves down the line. I could probably do them in a different color. Actually, let's show a couple of moves, because this is pretty challenging, right? Alright, so they go here, on d7. We were thinking bishop b5, but they can block, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, then bishop e6.
Yeah, there's another reason that bishop e6 should stand out as the top move. The reason is that, aside from this move having multiple ways of escaping, like they could block, they could also run away. That means you have more calculation to do to see if it really works. The other thing about this is it prevents them from running to a safe area. So we keep the king constantly in a place where we can get it. The king has to come out, so that's a good sign. So the next few moves you can probably guess pretty quickly. So how can we keep attacking the king?
95.
Yes, we should just use all of the pieces, attack the king brutally. Alright. In the next few moves, it's going to be checkmate, because once the king is coming out onto your side of the board, that's a pretty good sign.
Okay. B4?
I'm sorry, what? B4?
C4.
Oh, C4, okay. So if you play C4, they can actually go and hide on A6.
Ah, okay.
So we would like a move that does the same thing, but prevents king A6.
But if you mean like really same thing, then I guess it's bishop c4.
Yeah, that's right. So this controls b5 and a6. Now they're really getting stuck here. They played king a5. All right, we're near the end now.
Yeah. So bishop b4.
Mm-hmm. Good. Now they have to go here.
Bishop takes b3.
That actually gives them an extra way to escape. Do you remember the mating net concept? So this is very similar, where the king is stuck on the edge of the board again.
Right.
If we move this bishop, it gives them a way to escape the net. So we want to include more pieces in the attack.
Yeah, I see it now. So pawn takes b3.
Yeah, very good. And this was how the game ended. So I really like this game. This is a nice example of how, first of all, you can create an attacking type of position by sacrificing some pawns in the opening to finish development. And it also illustrates well how you should use all the pieces together to hunt down the king, even if you have to sacrifice some pieces. All right. I think just because somebody's waiting for me, I'm going to have to go. But of course, you can ask me some questions later on if you have any.
Yeah, of course.
All right, thanks. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thanks. Cool.